Module 1, Introduction to Ethical Hacking. Our module objectives in this first module include understanding the elements of information security, understanding information security attacks and information warfare, overview of cyber kill chain methodologies, TTPSs and IOCs, overview of hacking concepts, types, and phases of hacking, understanding ethical hacking concepts and its scope, overview of information security controls, and overview of information security acts and laws. To begin with, in our module flow, we're at 1, Information Security Overview. The elements of information security are several. Information security is a state of well-being of information and infrastructure in which the possibility of theft, tampering, and disruption of information and services is low or tolerable. Notice it's never going to be 0 because this field, that as at most, is in a state of constant flux and updating. So it's never 0, but we want to keep it again at a tolerably low level. What that tolerably low level, of course, is will be specific to your information security needs, the infrastructure you're working with, and of course, most importantly, what your employer or agency mandates. In this case, the elements of information security will be comprised of confidentiality, the assurance that the information is accessible only to those authorized to have access. Integrity, the trustworthiness of data resources in terms of preventing improper or unauthorized changes. Availability, assurance that the systems responsible for delivering, storing, and processing information are accessible when required by the authorized users. Authenticity refers to the characteristic of communication, document, or any data that ensures the quality of being genuine. And non-repudiation, a guarantee that the sender of a message cannot later deny having sent the message and that the recipient cannot deny having received the message. A few points of brief elaboration on all of this. Confidentiality, of course, is very important. It really comes down to making sure that all and only those people authorized or having appropriate permissions do get to look at the information or do have access to that information. The integrity also means that you want to make sure that that information has not been altered when at rest and being stored or when in transit and being communicated. Availability, of course, means the fact that you have the information available in all cases when you need it. Authenticity refers to the characteristic of communication document or any data that ensures the quality of being genuine. So authenticity means that the party who in fact claims that this piece of information or document is real and not a fabrication, for example, can be trusted. Okay, so authentication, the protocols are quite important to make sure that that information is in fact what it's supposed to be. And finally, non-repudiation is a very recent concept, but it has to do typically with digital contracts and the like, in that you want to have a mechanism available that can prevent somebody from being able to assert that they did not send or receive that message and you unable to prove otherwise. So you want to have a high degree of confidence that you can show that if somebody says, well, I never got that message, you can show that in fact they did get it. Okay, so that's the non-repudiation matrix. Motives, goals, and objectives of information security attacks. Typically, there is a motive or goal, then there's a method that's employed, and then there's a vulnerability. A motive originates out of the notion that the target system stores or processes something valuable, and this leads to the threat of an attack on the system. Attackers try to use various tools and attack techniques to exploit vulnerabilities in a computer system or its security policy and controls in order to fulfill their motives. There are many different kinds of motives that could be at play here. So motives behind information security attacks include simply disrupting business continuity, stealing information and manipulating data, creating fear and chaos by disrupting critical infrastructure, for example, like power or water, causing financial loss to the target, propagating religious or political beliefs, achieving a state's military objectives, damaging the reputation of the target, taking revenge for whatever reason, or demanding ransom payments. The classification of types of attacks include the following. We have passive attacks, and passive attacks do not tamper with the data and involve intercepting and monitoring network traffic and data flow on the target system or network. Examples include sniffing and eavesdropping. Passive attacks, furthermore, typically occur in the preliminary phase of an attack in which we're just gathering information, such as in footprinting and reconnaissance. Active attacks, on the other hand, in this case, active attacks tamper with the data in transit or disrupt the communication or services between the systems to bypass or break into secure systems. Examples include denial of service, man-in-the-middle attacks, session hijacking, and SQL injection. We also have close-in attacks. Close-in attacks are performed when the character is on a close physical proximity with the target system or network in order to gather, modify, or disrupt access to the information. So in this case, we are talking about attacks that are physically close to the proximity. For example, with war driving and putting up rogue access points in Wi-Fi, you're typically going to have your monitors and your scanners physically close to the target system. We also have insider attacks. Insider attacks involve using privileged access to violate rules or intentionally cause a threat to the organization's information or information systems. Examples include theft of physical devices and planting keyloggers, backdoors, and malware. Distribution attacks include attacks that occur when attackers tamper with hardware or software prior to installation. Attackers tamper with the hardware or software at its source or in transit. In some instances, these are also called supply chain attacks. Information warfare. The term information warfare, or InfoWar, refers to the use of information and communication technologies, ICTs, to gain a competitive advantage over an opponent or adversary. There are two basic types, defensive and offensive. In the case of defensive information warfare, this refers to all strategies and actions designed to defend against attacks on ICT assets. So the concepts involved in defensive warfare are such as prevention, deterrence, alerts, detection, emergency preparedness, and response. On the other hand, with offensive information warfare, this refers to information warfare that involves attacks against the ICT assets of an opponent. The concepts involved here include web application attacks, web server attacks, malware attacks, MITM or man-in-the-middle attacks, and system hacking. In our module flow, we'll now go to our next module, cyber kill chain concepts. So the cyber kill chain methodology, this is a methodology, retake. The cyber kill chain methodology is a component of intelligence-driven defense for the identification and prevention of malicious intrusion activities. It provides greater insights into attack phases, which helps secure professionals to understand the adversary's tactics, techniques, and procedures beforehand. We have on the bottom a diagram showing this. As we can see, we start in this methodology. We start, as always, with reconnaissance. We gather data on the target to probe for real points of weakness or vulnerabilities. Next, we create a deliverable malicious payload using an exploit and a backdoor. This is known as weaponization. This leads to delivery. Once you have created this weapon, it could be a Trojan, a virus, or whatnot, then of course you have to deliver it. So deliver means to send weaponized bundles to the victim using typically email, USB, or some kind of confederate that's already working at the company. This leads to exploitation, which means to exploit a vulnerability by executing code on the victim's system. If this is successful, then we have installation, in which case we install the malware to the target system. If that is successful, we then have command and control to create a command and control channel to communicate pass data back and forth. Typically, your command and control access will be remote. Seldom does a hacker want to be on the company premises, of course, to do the hacking. So typically command and control, is going to be remote, but not always. And finally, we have actions on objectives, which means perform actions to achieve intended objectives or goals, which could be simply to listen in or steal information or disrupt or, in fact, sometimes to destroy information. Tactics, techniques, and procedures. Again, the term tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, refers to the patterns of activities and methods associated with specific threat actors or groups of threat actors. Tactics, for example, are the guidelines that describe the way an attacker performs the attack from beginning to end. This guideline consists of the various tactics for information gathering to perform initial exploitation, privilege escalation, and lateral movement within the system, and to deploy measures for persistent access to the system and other purposes. Techniques, on the other hand, are the technical methods used by an attacker to achieve intermediate results during the attack. These techniques include initial exploitation, setting up and maintaining command and control channels, accessing the target infrastructure, and covering the tracks of data exfiltration and others. Finally, with procedures, we are talking about procedures that are organizational approaches that threat actors follow to launch an attack. The number of actions usually differs depending on the objectives of the procedure and the threat actor group involved. Typically, various threat groups that are well known have, in fact, very unique procedures and tactics that they use, as well as techniques. Case being, for example, the Russian hacker group, Cozy Bear, which is very active with banking Trojans, has its own, shall we say, signature brand of techniques they use, and also various procedures. And they, of course, also use very specific tools, such as the Drydex banking Trojan. Adversary behavioral identification. Adversary behavioral identification involves the identification of the common methods or techniques followed by an adversary to launch attacks on or to penetrate an organization's network. It gives the security professionals insight into upcoming threats and exploits. Adversary behaviors include, as we've mentioned, internal reconnaissance, the use of PowerShell, unspecified proxy activities, use of command line interfaces, HTTP user agents, command and control servers, use of DNS tunneling, use of web shell, and data staging. Next, we have indicators of compromise, IOCs. Quite important, indicators of compromise, IOCs, are the clues, artifacts, and pieces of forensic data found on the network or operating system of an organization that indicate a potential intrusion or malicious activity in the organization's infrastructure. This is the so-called smoking gun allegory, where we say where there's smoke, there's usually fire. And so the smoke would be the IOCs. IOCs are not intelligence, although they do act as good sources of information regarding the threats that serve as data points in the intelligence process. For example, an IOC might be repeated attempted logons to a specific site which has administration privileges. That would be a suspicious flag, and that would be an indicator of compromise. Security professionals need to perform continuous monitoring of IOCs to effectively and efficiently detect and respond to evolving cyber threats. There are categories of indicators of compromise. Understanding IOCs helps security professionals to quickly detect the threats against the organization and protect the organization from evolving threats. For this purpose, IOCs are divided into 4 categories. First, we have email indicators. Email indicators are used to send malicious data to the target organization or individual. Examples include the sender's email address may be suspicious, the email subject may be suspicious, and especially attachments or links could be very suspicious. Next, we have indicators, which are network indicators. Network indicators are useful for command and control, malware delivery, identifying the operating system, and other tasks. Examples include URLs, domain names, and IP addresses. Then we have host-based indicators. Host-based indicators are found by performing an analysis of the infected system within the organizational network. Examples include file names, file hashes, registry keys, DLLs, and mutex. Finally, the last class is behavioral indicators. Behavioral indicators of compromise are used to identify specific behavior related to malicious activities. Examples of behavioral indicators include document executing PowerShell scripts and remote command executions. In our module flow, we will now turn to basic hacking concepts. First, what is hacking? Hacking refers to exploiting system vulnerabilities and compromising security controls in order to gain unauthorized or inappropriate access to a system's resources. It involves modifying systems or application features to achieve a goal outside of the creator's original purpose or design. Hacking can be used to steal and redistribute intellectual property, leading to business loss. Who is a hacker? There are several definitions here. Number one, a hacker could be an intelligent individual with excellent computer skills who can create and explore computer software and hardware. For some hackers, hacking is a hobby to see how many computers or networks they can compromise. And thirdly, some hackers' intentions can either be to gain knowledge or to probe and do illegal things. Some hack with malicious intent, such as to steal business data, credit card information, social security numbers, email passwords, and other sensitive data. The takeaway from this slide is hacking per se is morally neutral. It's the intent that's critical. If you're a highly intelligent individual with excellent computer skills who can create and exploit computer software and hardware, and you have been contracted by a legitimate organization with permission to do a penetration test, you will use those skills, and in fact, you'll be doing it as a help to your employer or contractor, and it will be legal and permitted. So in this case, it would be what we would call a white hat hacker, okay? In the middle there, we have some hackers do what they do as a hobby or for bragging rights. If they do that without permission or appropriate authority, it could be illegal and something with punitive sanctions. And of course, in the last case, we have the clearly illegal case where the intentions can either be to gain knowledge or to do probe and do illegal things. So without permission in this case, we would call them black hat hackers. Hacker classes in more detail include the black hats. These are individuals with extraordinary computing skills. They resort to malicious or destructive illegal activities and are also known as crackers. Contrast to that, we have white hats. These are individuals who use their professed hacking skills for defensive purposes and are also known as security analysts. They have the permission to do what they do from the system owner, the government, or their employer. So we, in this course, are presumably white hat hackers because we will be using our skills appropriately with proper credentialing and proper permissions from our contractor or a government agency, the military, or a private company. Third, we have gray hats. They kind of fall in between. These are individuals who work both offensively and defensively at various times. In some cases, we have the reference to legal pen testers as gray hats because what they're doing is usually illegal, but because they are doing it with the sanction of their employer, it's not. So sometimes we are actually called gray hats. Fourth, we have suicide hackers. It's a rather rare class, but individuals who aim to bring down the critical infrastructure for a cause and are not worried about facing jail terms or any other kind of punitive measures or punishment are called suicide hackers. These are usually people we call terrorists, and they're frequently motivated by religion or some political ideology. We have script kiddies. These are unskilled hackers who compromise the system by running scripts, tools, and software that were developed by real hackers. They say things like, we're doing it for the lulz, meaning we're doing it for the thrill or the adrenaline rush of getting away with it. They're also very, very much into reputation and having bragging rights that, by the way, I was able to get into so-and-so system. Then we have cyber terrorists. These are individuals with a wide range of skills who are motivated by religious or political beliefs to create fear through the large-scale disruption of computer networks. I guess we could say that suicide hackers are probably a subclass of cyber terrorists. Next, we have state-sponsored hackers, individuals employed by the government to penetrate and gain top-secret information from and do damage to the information system of other governments. And actually, this goes beyond that. State-sponsored hackers are typically actually members of the military or the intelligence community of the state and are on payroll. And their purpose is typically to get information, but also could be outright robbery. For example, North Korean military hackers are very much into using ransomware to steal money. So that would still count as state-sponsored hackers. And we have the hacktivists, individuals who promote a political agenda by hacking, especially by defacing or disabling websites. So these folks are not interested in stealing information or destroying anything or making money. They want a message to be heard. A good example is the so-called anonymous hacking or hacktivist cohort, which does frequently use these tactics in order to embarrass, for example, an organization by defacing their website. Let us now take a look at the first phase of hacking, reconnaissance. Reconnaissance refers to the preparatory phase where an attacker seeks to gather information about a target prior to launching an attack. This information could be a future point of return, noted for ease of entry for an attack, when more about the target is known on a broad scale. The reconnaissance target range may include the target organization's clients, employees, operations, networks, and systems, and also regulatory information specific to the target. Reconnaissance types include passive and active. In the case of passive reconnaissance involves acquiring information without directly interacting with the target. For example, searching public records or news releases about the target. On the other hand, active reconnaissance would include reconnaissance that involves directly interacting with the target by any means. For example, telephone calls to the target's help desk or technical department would be active reconnaissance. Hacking phase, scanning. In this case, we have pre-attack phase. In this case, scanning refers to the pre-attack phase when the attacker scans the network for specific information based on information gathered during reconnaissance. A port scanner means that scanning can include the use of dialers, port scanners, network mappers, ping tools, and vulnerability scanners. Next, we have extract information. In this case, attackers extract information such as live machines, ports, port status, OS details, device type, and system uptime to launch their attack. Hacking phase next, gaining access. In this phase, gaining access refers to the point where the attacker obtains access to the operating system or application on the target computer or network. Secondly, the attacker can gain access at the operating system, the application, or network levels. Thirdly, the attacker can escalate privileges to obtain complete control of the system. In this process, the target's connected intermediate systems are also compromised. And lastly, examples include password cracking, buffer overflows, denial of service, and session hijacking. Hacking phase, maintenance and access. Maintaining access refers to the phase when the attacker tries to retain their ownership of the system. Attackers may prevent the system from being owned by other attackers by securing their exclusive access with backdoors, rootkits, or Trojans. Attackers can upload, download, or manipulate data, applications, and configurations on the owned system. Attackers use the compromised system to launch further attacks. Hacking phase, clearing tracks. Clearing tracks refers to the activities carried out by an attacker to hide malicious acts. The attacker's intentions include obtaining continuing access to the victim's system, remaining unnoticed and uncaught, and deleting evidence that might lead to their prosecution. The attacker overwrites the server system and application logs to avoid suspicion. Attackers always cover their tracks to hide their identity. And I'd like to add to that, the degree to which they are successful with that is dependent upon the sophistication of the attacker and the competence of the cybersecurity defending team. Ethical hacking concepts. What is ethical hacking? Ethical hacking involves the use of hacking tools, tricks, and techniques to identify vulnerabilities and ensure system security. And this is done with authorization on behalf of a contracting company, the government, the public sector, or healthcare industry. It focuses on simulating the techniques used by attackers to verify the existence of exploitable vulnerabilities in a system's security. Ethical hackers perform security assessments for an organization with the permission of the concerned authorities. This cannot be stated clearly enough that the authorities must give permission in writing, specifying in as much detail as possible what may or may not be done. And as a professional ethical hacker, you must adhere to these permissions precisely. Why ethical hacking is necessary? To beat a hacker, you need to think like one. Ethical hacking is necessary as it allows for counterattacks against malicious hackers through anticipating the methods used to break into the system. Reasons why organizations recruit ethical hackers are many. They may recruit them to prevent hackers from getting access to the organization's information systems, to uncover vulnerabilities in systems and explore their potential as a security risk, to analyze and strengthen an organization's security posture, including policies, network protection, infrastructure, and end user practices, to provide adequate preventative measures in order to avoid security breaches, to help safeguard customer data, and to enhance security awareness at all levels in a business. Perhaps most importantly, ethical hacking is necessary to provide the company hiring the hacker an objective third-party viewpoint that may very well catch lapses, deficiencies, and vulnerabilities in their system that their in-house IT team missed. Why ethical hacking is necessary continued. Ethical hackers try to answer the following questions. What can an intruder see on the target system? This is reconnaissance and scanning phases. What can an intruder do with that information? Gaining access and maintaining access phases. Does anyone at the target organization notice the intruder's attempt or successes? Reconnaissance and covering tracks phases. Are all components of the information system adequately protected, updated, and patched? How much time, effort, and money are required to obtain adequate protection? This is especially important in preparing your pen test report, as your employer or the client is obviously going to want to know how much it will cost them to upgrade or harden their securities. 6, are the information security measures in compliance with legal and industry standards? An important note on this area varies from state to state and also is in a constant state of flux. Legal and industry standards are always trying to catch up with the technological ecosystem of cybersecurity and the threatscape, and so it is wise to check on the updates as frequently as possible. Once again, compliance standards are always being changed and upgraded. Scope and limitations of ethical hacking. Scope. Ethical hacking is a crucial component of risk assessment, auditing, counter fraud, and information system security best practices. It is used to identify risks and highlight remedial actions. It also reduces ICT costs by resolving vulnerabilities. Limitations are as follows. Unless the businesses already know what they are looking for and why they are hiring an outside vendor to hack their systems in the first place, chances are there will be not much to gain from the experience. Secondly, an ethical hacker can only help the organization to better understand its security system. It is up to the organization to place the right safeguards on the network and take the necessary steps once again to harden their infrastructure. Skills of an ethical hacker fall into two broad categories, technical and non-technical. The technical skills of an ethical hacker include in-depth knowledge of major operating environments such as Windows, Unix, Linux, and Mac, in-depth knowledge of networking concepts, technologies, and related software and hardware, a computer expert adept at technical domains, knowledgeable about security areas and related issues, and high technical knowledge for launching sophisticated attacks. Non-technical skills could include the ability to learn and adopt new technologies quickly, strong work ethics and good problem solving and communication skills, a committed attitude to the organization's security policies, and once again, an awareness of local laws, standards, and policies. And I will add to that, it is absolutely imperative that the non-technical skills include a voracious curiosity to always be exploring new threats and their possible remediation. Skill set should include a very adept ability at doing research and analyzing disparate data points in order to draw conclusions about threats. In some, the non-technical skills very much include the ability to always stay up to date and as much as possible ahead of the curve on the next threat on the horizon. Information security controls. Information assurance, or IA, it refers to the assurance that the integrity, availability, confidentiality, and authenticity of the information and information systems is protected during the usage, processing, storage, and transmission of information. Some of the processes that help in achieving information assurance include: 1, developing local policy, process, and guidance; 2, design network and user authentication strategies; 3, identifying network vulnerabilities and threats; 4, identifying problem and resource requirements; 5, creating plans for identified resource requirements; 6, applying appropriate information assurance controls; 7, performing certification and accreditation; and 8, providing information assurance training. Defense in depth is, again, a layered approach. Defense in depth is a security strategy in which several protection layers are placed throughout an information system. It helps to prevent direct attacks against the system, and it's layered because a break in one layer only leads the attacker to the next layer. The importance of layered defenses cannot be overstated. Back in the older days, organizations frequently had robust policies as to their firewalls, and their firewall rules were very comprehensive. But once an intruder were able to penetrate that firewall, the idiom was, we have a hard shell with a soft inner, because once they were in the system inside the firewall, they were able to roam at free will. So it's imperative that even if they were to penetrate the firewall, you have segmented layered defenses to counteract such a contingency. What is risk? Risk refers to the degree of uncertainty or expectation that an adverse event may cause damage to the system. Risks are categorized into different levels according to their estimated impact on the system. A risk matrix is used to scale risk by considering the probability, the likelihood, and the consequence or impact of the risk. Risk levels include extreme, which means immediate measures should be taken to combat the risk, identify and impose controls to reduce risk to a reasonable low level. This would be an example of an ongoing breach, which has retake. Risk levels include extreme or high, which are immediate measures should be taken to combat that risk, identify and impose controls to reduce risk to a reasonable low level. This would be the case if there was an active breach of the system and all measures needed to be taken to stop it as soon as possible before further exfiltration of stolen data takes place or further damage is done to the system. Medium, no urgent action is required. Implement controls as soon as possible to reduce risk to a reasonably low level. This may be the case if a patch comes which is not of critical nature, but still should be done in a timely manner. Last but not least, low includes taking preventative steps to mitigate effects of risk. This could be in anything from an update or an upgrade to the system on a timely basis. The risk matrix on the right, as you can see, says probability and consequences. It is important to note one thing on the probability column at the very bottom. It says 1 to 20%. There is no such thing as zero risk. What we as professionals try to do, of course, is reassess the degree of risk and the exposure of the system to the threatscape and do our best to minimize that as best we can. Risk management is the process of reducing and maintaining risk at an acceptable level by means of a well-defined and actively employed security program. It is important to note that the level of risk management and acceptable risk is going to be relative to the kind of data being protected and the infrastructure thereby residing in. This being the case, for example, a financial institution will probably tolerate a much lower level of risk than an institution that just passes out brochures and free share advertising. Risk management phases include the following: risk identification. This means identifying the source, causes, consequences, and other details of the internal and external risks affecting the security of the organization. Risk assessment, assess the organization's risk and provide an estimate of the likelihood and impact of the risk. Risk treatment, select and implement appropriate controls for the identified risks. At this point, I want to interject the following comment. All of these could include the assessment of, has this malware, for instance, executed? We could identify the malware, assess its severity, and then the treatment, of course, is going to be very, very varied upon has it executed and has it infiltrated the system, as opposed to have we just identified it and possibly been lucky enough to sandbox the malware so it is in effect quarantined. So risk treatment selects and implements appropriate controls for the identified risks. Once again, this revisits the issue of what has the malware or the intrusion done so far, as best we can assess. Risk tracking ensures appropriate controls are implemented to handle known risks and calculates the chances of new risks occurring. So once again, is this an ongoing intrusion? Is it something that we've blocked? Is it something on the horizon we want to prevent? These are all going to be very subjective decisions based upon the prevailing circumstances. Last but not least, risk review evaluates the performance of the implemented risk management strategies. How well have we done in containing, preventing, blocking, or destroying the risk factor? Cyber threat intelligence is becoming increasingly important in the cybersecurity threatscape. As more and more sophisticated actors come into the fray, it becomes ever more important to try to understand their motivations, their origins, their tactics, their procedures, and of course, their strategies. Cyber threat intelligence is defined as the collection and analysis of information about threats and adversaries and the drawing of patterns that provide the ability to make knowledgeable decisions for preparedness, prevention, and response actions against various cyber attacks. Cyber threat intelligence helps the organization to identify and mitigate various business risks by converting unknown threats into known threats. It helps in implementing various advanced and proactive defense strategies. The types of threat intelligence are several. Long-term, we have strategic, high level of information on changing risk consumed by high-level executives of management. This could include a broad snapshot or an overview of a specific group and its history and possible future intentions, like a group producing banking Trojans would be an example. Tactical information attackers, TTPs, consumed by IT services and SOC managers, administrators. So in this case, we would want to look at this particular group that produces banking Trojans, like how exactly do they try to distribute them? How exactly do they operate? What are their methods of ingress and surreptitious intrusion into a system? On a short-term, immediate use, the types of threat intelligence include operational. This is information on a specific incoming attack. So once again, going back to our example, we have this group here. Let's say it's the Russian banking Trojan group, Cozy Bear. They're perhaps putting out Drydex or Ryuk or one of these banking Trojans. And then, of course, we want to know when might they specifically attack us. Okay, so this information is consumed by security managers and network defenders on a high level. On a low level, which is the technical side of the equation, information on specific indicators of compromise is gathered by the IT security team and consumed by SOC staff and IR teams. This brings us to threat modeling. Threat modeling is a risk assessment approach for analyzing the security of an application by capturing, organizing, and analyzing all the information that affects the security of an application. Threat modeling processes include, to begin with, identifying security objectives, helps to determine how much effort needs to be toward the subsequent steps. Once again, just to mention, this oftentimes becomes a matter of balance. The more secure you make the network, the less convenient it becomes. On the other hand, if you make it very convenient, pretty much you're leaving it wide open to attack. So this is a matter of subjective determination based upon what kind of balance do you want to strike between convenience and security. Always, always an issue. Secondly, application overview. Identify the components, data flows, and trust boundaries. Decompose the application. Helps to find more relevant, more detailed threats. Identify threats. Identify threats relevant to the control scenario and context using the information obtained in steps 2 and 3 previously. And number 5, identify vulnerabilities. Identify weaknesses related to threats found using vulnerable categories. And let's take a look at incident management. As a cybersecurity professional, this will be perhaps one of the most stressful things you will have to do in your day-to-day job. When there's a breach or some kind of incident, it needs to be addressed rapidly, contained, analyzed, and prevented for future occurrences. Incident management is a set of defined processes to identify, analyze, prioritize, and resolve security incidents to restore normal service operations as quickly as possible and prevent future recurrence of the incident. As you can see from this slide, there are several components to incident management. Beginning, there's the vulnerability handling, artifact handling, announcements and alerts. The actual incident itself is subcategorized into 4 possible factors, these being triage. In the event if there's more than one incident, you might need to triage because you may not have the resources to address each and every one of those incidents. Secondly, you will have to respond to the incident, after which you'll have to report and detect it, and of course, analyze. Other incident management services, of course, can include more in-depth analysis and forensics. Incident handling and response includes many, many activities, but basically it is the process of taking organized and careful steps when reacting to a security incident or a cyber attack. So here are the steps involved in the IH&R processes. First, there's preparation, incident recording and assignment, which could also include categorizing, indexing, and taxonomizing the incident in case, if it is a known, perhaps, malware that's already been cataloged. Then we have incident triage once again, if what is going on is overwhelming and you do not have the personnel or resources to address all aspects of the incident, you may have to make a judgment call and address those parts which are most pernicious and perhaps most damaging first. Next, there is notification, which could include notifying the CISO, the CEO, your department manager, and there might also be legal requirements as to notifying various authorities. Next, there's containment. The role of containment is very, very important. If there has been a breach, you need to stop it as soon as possible using the tools at your disposal so that the breach does not spread further. Next, we have evidence gathering, and this, of course, will include forensic analysis. In some certain cases, the forensic analysis may become quite sophisticated, and you may need to bring in outside experts to do the in-depth analysis. Next, we have eradication. After having assessed what the incident is, where it spread, and the damage it's caused, we need to stop it and also erase all the tracks and potential fallout from that incident. Recovery, of course, means once we have eradicated the problem, we need to reset everything to previous state so everything is working properly. Post-incident activities are extremely important, perhaps none more so than incident documentation. You need to document this not only for the purpose of documenting it for notification to your superiors, possibly state authorities, but also if it happens again, the more documentation you have, the more equipped you will be to deal with this incident or perhaps one that's similar but not identical. We need to also do an incident impact assessment. What files were compromised? What was breached? What was erased? What kind of damage was caused? This is very important. And then we have to review and revise policies. Did we fail to comply with policies, or was it the case our policies to begin with were simply not comprehensive enough to address the incident? This takes time, and of course, analysis again is absolutely crucial. Once we've done that, we can close the investigation, and incident disclosure again has to do with whom do we go to and tell that this has happened. Obviously, your CIS or your CIO, CEO, CTO will need to be notified. But again, if there are legal repercussions, such as financial management or HIPAA, then of course the proper authorities may also need to be notified. The role of AI and machine learning in cybersecurity. This cannot be overstated enough that AI and machine learning are going to take an ever-increasing toll in the cybersecurity defensive landscape. AI is now beginning to be utilized in order to prevent cyber attacks, to detect cyber attacks, to analyze cyber attacks, and also to further develop a lexicon of cyber attacks that may indeed be motivated by AI functionalities. To begin, machine learning and artificial intelligence are now vastly used across various industries and applications due to the increasing computing power, data collection, and storage capabilities of today's systems. Machine learning is an unsupervised self-learning system that is used to define what the normal network looks like, along with its devices, and then to backtrack and report any deviations or anomalies in real time. Basically, what we're doing here is we have an artificial brain, a neurocomputational architecture, and we are going to teach this artificial brain to recognize what counts as a healthy system devoid of threats. And the more instances that we supply to the artificial brain, the more it will be able to fine-tune and discern its ability to detect any deviations or anomalies from this first baseline. Thus, the more the artificial brain is in fact taught, the more effective it will be in preventing future breaches or malwares. AI and ML in cybersecurity helps in identifying new exploits and weaknesses, which can then be easily analyzed to mitigate further attacks. The reason we use AI and ML is because the sheer number, volume, diversity of cyber attacks, exploits, as well as malware is absolutely overwhelming and is overwhelming the capacities of IT teams to properly deal with it. Therefore, we are turning to new tools to help us manage the sheer volume of data that needs to be analyzed and the data points that need to be correlated in order to effectively manage these threats. Machine language classification techniques include supervised learning, which makes use of algorithms that input a set of labeled training data with the aim of learning the differences between the labels. In this case, what we basically do is provide the machine with an exemplar of a situation or data points that it needs to recognize as acceptable, and then be able to discern data points that might be accrued, which are in fact deviant or anomalous to that set, thereby indicating possible malware or threats or exploits. Secondly, machine learning classification techniques include unsupervised learning, which makes use of algorithms that input unlabeled training data with the aim of deducting all categories by itself. This is sometimes called deep learning. And again, the crucial difference is with unsupervised learning, you do not have an exemplar. The machine sort of learns from scratch by looking at millions of instances of code or data points to slowly discern any patterns that might emerge, thereby indicating a discernment between instances of malware or threats and those that are not. In sum, machine learning includes unsupervised learning, which is further subcategorized into dimensionality reduction and clustering, and supervised learning, which includes classification and regression. The role of AI and ML in cybersecurity is vast. The cybersecurity market is set to exceed $300 billion by 2024, And the AI-related cybersecurity market is predicated to reach a value of $38.2 billion in just a few years later at 2026. As we can see by the bar graphs on the right, this in fact holds across all major geographical regions. It seems that AI is taking a proportionally larger role in cybersecurity defenses and as well as money spent thereon too. Further, according to CB Insights, alongside overall rising investment activity, many cybersecurity companies are emerging to offer novel solutions to cyber threats by leveraging advantages of AI. At this point, I could interject. For example, there are several major players now currently emerging on the landscape. One is Deep Instinct. Deep Instinct, once again, uses deep learning, and their point is to have trained an artificial brain, a neurocomputational architecture, if you will, to recognize instances of malware after having taught said machine through millions and millions of various malware samples to recognize what is perhaps a threat, potentially or actually. Another company is called Darktrace. This is a UK firm which uses AI, but in a different way. It looks at the systems processes, basically the networks processes, and tries to learn what are typically healthy processes in a network to those which are, again, anomalous or discordant, thereby potentially harmful. Another example is a very new startup now. They called Cycognito. They are using AI to actually map the entire internet and try to correlate various types of threat factors with various types of clients. For example, they're trying to correlate, if you are a financial institution, what are the threat factors and the threat players that most likely will affect you. Last but not least, there is another company called Mayachitra, and they came out with something called MAL-C through the Department of Defense. And MAL-C is a system that uses the AI of recognition and pattern recognition as used in vision mapping and applies that heuristic or paradigm to identifying malware. And I'm sure there will be many, many more applications of AI to various vestiges of AI cybersecurity. So cybersecurity is the fourth most active industry that deals with companies applying AI, and this may in fact change soon. How do AI and ML prevent cyber attacks? As my previous discussion of the various companies that are leveraging AI architectures to help with cyber defense probably hinted, there's many ways that AI can be helpful. One is password protection and authentication. 2, phishing detection and prevention. 3, threat detection. 4, vulnerability management. And 5 is behavioral analysis. Darktrace is a good example of behavioral analysis AI. 6, network security. 7, AI-based antivirus. 8, fraud detection, and again here you're probably looking at patterns in data points to identify fraudulent or potentially fraudulent exchanges or interactions. Botnet detection, especially to prevent DOS or DDoS attacks, and last but not least, AI to combat other AI threats. This is a nascent thing just on the horizon, but it is already becoming evident that malware is also going to be designed by AI. So we're rapidly approaching the science fiction scenario where AI and AI will verse each other in cyberspace. Next, we want to take a look at information security laws and standards. On this point, I'd like to strongly emphasize that laws and standards in cybersecurity are always playing catch up. The threatscape, the realm of cybersecurity interactions, as well as the kinds and diversity of malware and threats are changing so rapidly that the informational security laws and standards are always trying to keep up with this. Not only is this the case, but the various ecosystems of technology used in cybersecurity also, of course, are evolving rapidly to keep up with the new threats. And once again, the laws and policies are trying to catch up with that. So it's fair to say their laws and policies are pretty much out of date as soon as they come out. And as a cybersecurity professional, you should keep this in mind, that you should be forward-looking, proactive, anticipatory in what you think you will need to report, not just today, but tomorrow and the next week, etc., as these processes, of course, always are evolving. But to take a look at, there's several major categories of compliance that we need to consider. Perhaps none more so obvious is the payment card industry data security standards. As we probably all know, the earliest instances of malware were used probably to steal credit card numbers. And so credit card numbers and financial information like bank account numbers, passwords, etc., are prime targets for thieves and black hat hackers. The PCI Industry Data Security Standard is a proprietary information security standard for organizations that handle cardholder information for major debit, credit, prepaid, ePurse, ATM, and PLS cards. Point to make on this case, we might retake. Point to make on this case, in keeping with what was previously said as being proactive and anticipatory when it comes to the application of standards to new technology and new financial schemes, is that cryptocurrency will probably also become more regulated as to how it is stored, transmitted, and divulged. Secondly, PCI DSS applies to all entities involved in payment card processing, including merchants, processors, acquirers, issuers, and service providers, as well as all other entities that store, process, or transmit cardholder data. In fact, if your employer is going to be in any way connected with processing financial information or storing it, you will be best advised to try to keep abreast of all the latest changes in the laws and procedures as to how to safeguard that information. Also, there are strict laws, procedures, and regulations as to what to do if this financial information is somehow compromised through a breach and who needs to be notified. PCI Data Security Standards, a high-level overview, includes the following: build and maintain a secure network, protect cardholder data, maintain a vulnerability management program, implement strong access control measures, regularly monitor and test networks, and maintain an information security policy. Failure to meet PCI DSS requirements may result in fines or the termination of payment card processing privileges. And if it is a flagrant violation where it is shown that you as a cybersecurity professional were complacent or lapsed, it may well cost you your job. If it's going to cost the company millions of dollars in losses, they're going to be looking for somebody to blame, and you will be number one in that row. So once again, safeguard that financial data at all times. ISO IEC 27001:2013. This specifies the requirements for establishing, implementing, and maintaining and continually improving an information security management system within the context of an organization. It is intended to be suitable for several different types of use, including the following. 1, use within organizations to formulate security requirements and objectives. Use within organizations to ensure that security risks are cost effectively managed. Use within an organization to ensure compliance with laws and regulations. Definition of new information security management processes. Identification and clarification of existing informational security management processes. Use by organization management to determine the status of information security management activities, and the implementation of business enabling information security. Used by organizations to provide relevant information about information security to customers. So this is a fairly broad category. It could include anything from password management to private documents to obviously in the most sensitive cases, sensitive information by the government or intelligence agencies, cryptographic keys. So all of that could be included under this. And last but not least, IP, intellectual property safeguarding, is a component of this consideration also. Next, we have Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, popularly known as HIPAA. Now, HIPAA has been around quite some time, but if you look at the long-term development of HIPAA, what you're going to find is it's constantly being upgraded and strengthened. So in the case of HIPAA, it's not only the case that the technology is causing it to further develop and evolve, it's also the case that Congress has seen to it to strengthen the rules applying to healthcare information. So with HIPAA's administrative simplification statutes and rules, we can briefly take a look at what is included under this act. Electronic transaction and code set standards. Under this category, HIPAA requires every provider who does business electronically to use the same healthcare transactions codes, sets, and identifiers. So basically, it's a requirement for uniformity. There's a privacy rule which provides federal protection for the personal healthcare information held by covered entities and gives patients an array of rights with respect to that information. As you may have noticed lately, if you go to the doctor and you want to share your information with another doctor, you need to sign forms called release of information forms, and these are becoming more and more specific and restrictive as HIPAA rules have become strengthened over time. Next, we have a security rule for HIPAA, which specifies a series of administrative, physical, and technical safeguards for covered entities to use to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and the availability of electronically protected health information. Next, we have national identifier requirements. This requires that healthcare providers, health plans, and employers have standard national numbers that identify them attached to standard transactions. Once again, the ethos here is we're trying to maintain uniformity. Last but not least, we have an enforcement rule provides standards for enforcing all the administrative simplification rules. In fact, if a HIPAA rule is transgressed, the consequences to the transgressor or the violator could be quite severe. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act is once again a financial information related act, but in this case, this is specifically tailored typically to the banking industry, and the prime motivation of this act was money laundering. So it is an act that was enacted to try to prevent, or at least get a better grip on money laundering. Retake. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act is again an act that deals with issues of financial confidentiality and financial information, but in this case, it's specifically tailored to the banking industry, and primarily it was enacted as a way to prevent or detect money laundering. It was enacted in 2002. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act is designed to protect investors and the public by increasing the accuracy and reliability of corporate disclosures. Of course, this also has the umbrella of covering money laundering issues as well as possible issues with dishonest investment and fraud. The key requirements and provisions of the SOX, as it's called, are organized into 11 titles. Briefly, we can look at the main ones. Title 1, Public Company Accounting Oversight Board provides independent oversight of public accounting firms providing audit services. Auditors. Auditor independence establishes the standards for external auditor independence intended to limit conflicts of interest and address new auditor approval requirements, audit partner rotation, and auditing reporting requirements. Title 3, Corporate Responsibility, mandates that senior executives, like individual responsibility for the accuracy and completeness of corporate financial records. Title 4, Enhanced Financial Disclosures, describe enhanced reporting requirements for financial transactions, including off-balance sheet transactions, pro forma figures, and the stock transactions of corporate officers. Title 5, Analyst Conflicts of Interest, consists of measures designed to help restore investor confidence in the reporting of securities analysts. Title 6, Commission Resources and Authority, defines practices to restore investor confidence in securities analysts. Just a comment on the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. If you look at the act in general, what you'll appreciate is its response to huge amounts of fraud and violations of financial disclosure information by entities such as the Enron scandal in other entities, which included money laundering. So it is essentially an act that's a response to serious violations in the financial sector and banking industry. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act and the Federal Information Security Management Act are very, very important. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMCA, is a United States copyright law that implements two 1996 treaties of the World Intellectual Property Organization, or WIPO. It defines the legal prohibitions against the circumvention of technological protections and measures employed by copyright owners to protect their works and against the removal of alteration of copyright management information. Briefly, this was primarily instigated, but not solely, by piracy of DVDs, CDs, and music services. So this is meant to address the theft of these media through a digital medium. The Federal Information Security Management Act, or FISMA, provides a comprehensive framework for ensuring the effectiveness of information security controls over information resources that support federal operations and assets. This includes the following: standards for categorizing information and information systems by mission impact, standards for minimum security requirements for information and information systems, guidance for selecting appropriate security controls for information systems, and guidance for accessing security controls and information systems and determining security control effectiveness, and last but not least, guidance for security authorization of information systems. Once again, this is especially pertinent in the federal sphere. So the cyber law in different countries is quite different and diverse. And just like as with cyber law in general, it is constantly undergoing revision, development, and updating. So once again, these might be a little bit dated, but essentially, as you can see from this little rundown, if you're going to be dealing with a foreign employer, this might in fact be quite pertinent to you beyond the US standards. Also to be considered carefully is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which pertains especially to the dissemination or authorized transmission of sensitive information to a foreign agent. Clearly, this will be the case with intelligence gathering. So once again, these acts are always being revised, and several of the important ones for the United States include the Computer Information Act, or Freedom of Information Act, and Computer Security Act. For our purposes as cybersecurity professionals, especially as pen testers, what we need to be very aware of is the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which introduces very severe penalties in the cases of unauthorized access intrusion or deliberate alteration of information without authorization in a computer's network or system. Clearly, again, as a future pen tester, you need to be aware of this, because you want to make darn sure that if you're going to be pen testing somebody's system, the scope of your engagement is clearly spelled out and permitted, lest you run afoul of this particular act. If we look at other countries, as I said, these are always in the process of revision and updating. So Australia, UK, China, India, and Germany, perhaps the most draconian measures as applies to these matters is China, as shown in this particular tableau. Going along to the next one, we have, again, a vast trove of diverse rulings and laws. On this front, Hong Kong has changed, clearly because of China's involvement. So those basic laws, I would hazard to conjecture, have also been revised and changed. So to summarize what we've covered so far, let's take a look. In this module, we discussed elements of information security attacks, and information warfare. We discussed cyber kill chain methodologies, TTPS and IOCS in detail. We also discussed hacking concept types and phases. Also, this module also covered ethical hacking concepts such as scope and limitations of ethical hacking skills, and other pertinent information in detail. We discussed information security controls such as defense in depth, risk management, cyber threat intelligence, threat modeling and incident management processes, and AI and ML. And this module ended with a detailed discussion of various information security acts, laws, policies, regulations, etc. from around the world. The next module, we will go into detail about how attackers, as well as ethical hackers and pen testers, perform footprinting to collect information about the target of an evaluation before an attack or audit.